All eyes are on President Biden's foreign policy right now, following his first international trip as tensions between Russia and the U.S. continue to get worse. Joining us now is U.S. Ambassador to Switzerland under President Trump, Ambassador Ed McMullen. Mr. Ambassador, it is a pleasure to have you on the show this morning.
Good to be with you. Good to see you, Rick.
Nice to see you.
Mr. Ambassador, last week, the president and Vladimir Putin got together in Geneva, Switzerland. I'm sure you saw that. Just wondering what you thought about that first summit between the two leaders.
Well, I can tell you, I actually just got in from Geneva last night. I was in Europe for the past week, and I think like many Europeans, the Americans are wondering, where is the substance? What really was the purpose of the summit? And I think that frustration, the lack of real focus and purpose is something I think that Europeans and Americans share here. I also think the president clearly did make some headway in getting a relationship and sitting down with President Putin. But if there's no substance, what's the purpose of a summit? President Trump went to many summits, walked out with many important achievements, and actually made some substantive positive relationships in that deal. I haven't seen that from this, and I can tell you the Europeans are as perplexed as we are in the United States.
Mr. Ambassador, how was the tone different from when President Biden spoke with President Putin versus when President Trump met with President Putin in 2018?
Yeah, I think the tone was one of the most important questions. There was supposed to be a much longer summit than actually occurred. President Trump seemed to suck the marrow out of the bone in every meeting he had when he left. The leaders of the international community knew exactly where the president stood. Where he stood was America first, putting American priorities first. I think the contrast between the two is clear. We saw Europe embrace President Biden talking about how America's back, but there was no substance behind it that we saw, and we wait for that substance. There may be an approach and something that they were trying to achieve, but we really haven't seen the substance yet, and I think the Europeans are very perplexed by that.
What viewers may not know is that you, Ambassador McMullen, were the third person to join the Trump campaign early on in 2015, if I recall. You've been a loyal supporter of the president. You've given him lots of fundraisers. You ran the South Carolina race for President Trump. I can't think of somebody better to give us their perspective about the Trump presidency and foreign policy. What do you think are some of the greatest achievements of the Trump presidency, and what will the America First initiative and legacy be known for?
Well, that's a great question, Rick, and I think it's one that hasn't been asked very much by reporters. And I think when you go to Europe, as I just did, you hear directly from particularly business people that President Trump's great achievement, I think, on our domestic policy, but also internationally, was that he set a tone for business. He created tax cuts. He did the reforms on regulatory reforms, and they had a substantive impact on the investment in the United States. 500,000 jobs were invested in the United States from Switzerland alone as a result of the president's tax cuts and innovative approaches to business. I think that was one of the great achievements because all the world rose their boats during the president's term. And I think we're seeing the success of that continue today. I think on the diplomatic front, the president spoke very clearly. Rick, I think Ambassador Grinnell, you in Germany on the NATO front made a great achievement in making NATO understand that he was serious. 8 presidents before him tried to get NATO to pay their fair share. President Trump and you and other ambassadors were successful in making that happen. These are the kinds of things I think the Europeans respected. They respect authority and power and influence, and they know that the United States is the great leader of foreign of liberty and democracy. And I think that that's something that is going to continue. And I think President Trump was responsible for really cementing that. Just like Reagan, peace through strength was something the Europeans truly understand, as do Americans.
We just have a short time left. I want to get your perspective, though, on Switzerland and the European Union. I know you worked very hard to try to have some sort of a bilateral agreement. Where did that actually finish? What is the trade relationship with Switzerland? And do you ever see a separate trade agreement between the United States and Switzerland?
Well, I can tell you, had there been a second term that President Trump would have had, we would have been achieving that exactly. A free trade agreement is something Switzerland wants with the United States.
Yeah.
We trade a deal with Switzerland. We moved from number 8 to number 6 in foreign direct investment in the United States during my term, which is great. The Swiss are innovative. They love liberty and freedom and democracies. They're a great trading partner. And I think it's very important we take this seriously. That is a bipartisan issue. It's not partisan.
Yeah,
and I know
sure.
that President Biden was approached by the Swiss with this in their bilateral meeting. I hope they take it seriously in Washington and move forward.
Me too. We're out of time. Thank you so much, Ambassador Ed McMullen. So great to have you.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, we're real news for real people.